Welcome to the Breech Birth podcast. I'm Sasha Hopkins, private midwife, breech birth educator, and your host. This is a space to hear the real, raw, and powerful stories of women who have experienced breech birth in all its layers. Each episode features honest conversations with women who've experienced breech firsthand, offering insight and reflection. This podcast was born from the knowing that these stories need to be heard to inform, connect, and reclaim the story of breech birth. Whether you're navigating breech birth yourself, supporting others, or simply curious, welcome and thank you. The Breech Birth podcast is independently created and produced. If you'd like to support the continuation of this space, you can do so through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support helps keep these stories being shared and accessible to women and families around the world, and you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you for being a part of this community. Hi, Jess. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Sasha. Thanks for having me.
Before we start, context questions. Where are we located?
I live in the sunny coast hinterland in Queensland, just, on a couple of acres.
Amazing. Jealous. How many weeks were you when you had your breech baby?
I was 37 and 5.
And what sort of care did you receive in pregnancy and birth?
We opted to go down the route of a publicly funded home birth program, but then ended up in hospital through our same home birth midwives.
And did you have a vaginal birth or a cesarean?
Vaginal.
Beautiful. Before you jump into your story, do you want to just share a little snapshot about yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, cool. So I'm Jess. I'm currently a stay-at-home mum with my little boy Luca, and I live with my husband Jeremy, as I said, on a couple of acres in the sunny coast hinterland. I'm also a registered nurse midwife, and I work in adults ICU at the moment.
Great. And so you've had one baby and that was your breech baby. Do you want to start from the beginning? What was it, a planned pregnancy? Did you know who you wanted to birth with, what you wanted to do? Because you've chosen a home birth initially. So where did that idea come from?
So I suppose from the start, we were really grateful and fell pregnant quite quickly. I'd had a Mirena for 10 years and thought I'd get it out and just see what happened. And we were really lucky. It didn't take very long at all. And sort of being a midwife, I always knew that I wanted to try for a home birth as long as we were low risk. And after doing a bit of research, I knew that we were in the catchment for our local hospital to get into the home birth program. So I basically peed on the stick, got the bloods, got my GP to send off the referral straight away. I also knew a few people that worked at the hospital that I wanted to go through, and it's a relatively new program, but was pretty keen to get onto that home birth option if possible. We also discussed going private midwifery for a home birth, but I sort of felt a bit more comfortable going through the public system just to be under some Queensland Health guidelines, and just financially we opted to go public.
Yeah. What was the process? Could you self-refer? Did you have to be referred? What did that look like?
I think you had to be referred via the GP, but our GP was really great. As soon as I said, yep, we want a home birth, she said, great, what do we do? Let's get you in the program straight away. And I think it was probably the start of November when I got referred. I think I was about 6 weeks. I hadn't had a scan or anything yet. And then I was contacted it was just before Christmas, I was contacted. So I must have been about 11 weeks and said I'd been accepted and that a midwife would contact me in January regarding a meetup. So I think I met my midwife at 14 weeks.
Great. Nice and early. It's good.
Yeah, it's great.
And were your appointments with the midwife or in the hospital? What did that, or at home?
It was a mix, actually. So the first couple were in clinic. I think it was monthly for the first little while. And then from 28 weeks, I think it was fortnightly. I think we had our first home visit at 26 or 28 weeks. And it was also like a bit of a safety check to check the home out as well as to do our standard check. And then I think we had 3 or 4 more in the home after that. And it wasn't always our primary midwife. Like we ended up meeting all of the team that would potentially be there for the home birth. They just liked us to know everyone and be comfortable with everyone. And it was really good. I enjoyed meeting all the midwives.
Yeah. How many were in a team? Do you know?
I think there was 4 in a team. So we met the 4, but there was sort of one that was the primary backup.
Yeah, great. And pregnancy, how was it for you?
I was really lucky. I had a really smooth pregnancy. I loved being pregnant. I luckily wasn't sick, and I was doing shift work, so really grateful that that didn't affect me. Of course, the standard fatigue in the first trimester. I did have a little bit of bleeding at the start, unprovoked, but there was sort of no rhyme or reason for it. And then after that, it was fairly smooth sailing. A couple of times when my liver function was a bit off, so they tested for preeclampsia and things like that, but it was all clear. I did have a succenturiate lobe on my placenta with marginal cord insertion. Otherwise, everything was standard, low risk. And we just opted for the sort of initial scans and then the 20-week one. And ideally had planned to have no further scans from that point on.
Yep. Do you want to just explain the placenta for those that might not know what that is?
Yeah, it's been a little bit since I worked in mid, but yeah, succenturiate lobe is just that extra. You've got your main placenta, and then there was another lobe attached with vessels to that. So it was quite a thin sort of linkage to that other lobe. And they looked on our 20-week scan and said there weren't any major vessels running over the cervix or anything, and the placenta moved to very clear of the os. It was good. And then the cord insertion was just sort of on the edge of the main lobe of the placenta, so not sort of central.
Great. And
Again,
at what point did you find out that baby was breech?
I think it was about, well, I sort of had an inkling for a while that they like very active baby, never really felt too much in the pelvis. And then at 28 weeks, we had a home visit from not our primary midwife. No, sorry, it was 30 weeks. It was the second midwife. And I'd actually caught up with some midwifery friends a few days prior and said, hey, can you just help me? Because I think Bub's transverse. And a friend did. And she said, oh, I think there's something in the pelvis, but I don't think it's a head. And then when the midwife helped me, it was sort of oblique breech. So there was still nothing in the pelvis, but I had a head sort of wedged up under my ribs. And at that point, I said, when do I start doing inversions and spinning babies? Like, what's the plan? And she sort of said, just hold off for now because you're still only 30-ish weeks. Just wait a little bit. So from then on, I thought, oh, what road are we going to go down? And then at 34 weeks, sorry, I saw a head of the home birth team in clinic and he was definitely oblique breech, but still nothing in the pelvis. And then we discussed all the options and my husband and I were very much like, want a vaginal birth, as long as it's safe. I was super keen to try for vaginal breech, as long as it didn't end up, footling with a cord or anything. And then so she kind of counseled us on our options and said, look, ECV is, probably an option for you. And then at the 36 weeks, our primary midwife was coming out to our home and she messaged me that morning and said, hey, ultrasound isn't working, but I'm, 95% sure I'll be able to palp and tell whether you're breech. And I replied with, yeah, he's 100%, or I didn't know we were having a boy, but 100%,
Yeah.
There's a head under my ribs. I'm very certain. And she confirmed that when she got here. So then we booked in for an ECV. It was quite busy. There was a lot of women that were breached at the time, even in the home birth team, apparently. So there was a lot of ECVs happening. So I think I was 30. They tried to book me in about 36 weeks for the ECV, but it turned out to be 37 and 3 was the only option. So that was sort of booked in. And I worked till I was 36 weeks. I was sort of doing 12-hour shifts and nights till then. So in my mind, I was going to have a 42-week baby and, have a month to do things. But yeah, didn't plan out like that. So I went in for the ECV at our local hospital and I had to have a formal ultrasound first, which was a little bit outside of what I'd planned. I was quite nervous about finding things that would make me high risk and would take me off the home birth pathway. So I was very much against having further ultrasounds if there was no indication. So I went in for the ultrasound and I didn't realize how emotional I'd get because I've never been a patient in hospital and I've never had an armband and I didn't really process it until I got there and was going through it. And the ultrasonographer for our ECV was really young and didn't say much and I could see all the percentiles coming up on the screen. And, she was like, oh yeah, the cord and there's a foot down near your cervix. And I started to freak out thinking, oh, I can't have an ECV. I'm going to have a booked Caesar. So I was quite emotional by the time I went round to the assessment unit and just burst into tears there. And this beautiful young midwife, because our midwife hadn't arrived yet, just said, oh, it's okay. And she was really lovely and amazing. And then we had a CTG, which again was outside what I wanted. I'd sort of hoped to not have any monitoring at all through my pregnancy, but we got a CTG, which was no worries. And then the reg came in and asked if, they could have a go for training, which was absolutely fine.
So the doctor have a go at the ECV, is that what you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
Just
Yeah.
using midwife language.
Sorry, the registrar. So one of the junior doctors, along with the consultant, like he done plenty, but, came and consented me and they had a student doctor there as well. I said, yeah, whatever, I'm fine. I understand that everyone needs to learn. So the first attempt, they'd kind of probably laid me a bit too flat. So I almost passed out and they gave me a little break. And then they had a few more goes and the reg got him halfway round, but felt him flip back under his hands. Cheeky little thing. And then the consultant came in and had a go, and she was clearly very experienced and just went to town, like trying to move the baby, but no luck. And she sort of said, oh, look, it's your first baby. You should have another go. Let's book you in for, Thursday. And this was the Monday. And I was a bit hesitant because I'd sort of done a bit of research and I'd said, look, it's only a 50% chance it's going to work, or roughly the first time. What are the chances it's going to work a second time on a primip with, a tighter abdomen and uterus and all that? And she said, oh, no, it's worth having a go. So I tentatively said, okay, whatever, let's get booked in. And in my mind, I knew it wasn't going to work. I had a feeling. So then we went home. And I was pretty tired, but just sort of went to bed, no issues. And then the next day, so this was on the Tuesday, would have been 37 and 4. I was shattered. Like my belly was really tender. I was just really tired, but I had all these jobs that I wanted to get done. So I started cooking and cleaning and preparing. And, my husband kept saying, lay down, you're exhausted. And I was like, no, I'm going to make, fennel and pork sausage rolls and lactation brownies. It'll be great. Chuck them in the freezer. Classic. And then my midwife called me, like my primary, and just said, how you feeling? And I said, hey, I'm exhausted, but I'm going to have a breech baby. I feel it. This baby's not going to move. I can feel it in my bones. And she said, yep, let's keep the ECV booked in, but we'll see what happens. And she'd actually said to her team after speaking to me, Jess is going to have a breech baby. I'm sure of it, which is quite funny. And then I suppose I didn't really give any background, but previously to this, I'd done all the spinning babies. I'd done acupuncture. I burnt the Chinese mugwort. I did handstands in the pool. I did the G-Lorry breath work, like body work thing that my midwife recommended. So I'd sort of done everything that I thought was possible to try and turn the baby, to no avail. So yeah, I tried all that. And then that evening we went to bed. It was probably 10 o'clock by the time I was asleep. And at about 11, I got up with this intense urge to wee. And as I stood up out of the bed, my waters broke everywhere, kind of like the movies. And I always tell women, oh, it doesn't happen like the movies. It'll probably just be a trickle. And yeah, it was everywhere. And I was in this state of shock. And I kind of jumped in the shower, and I had previously spoken to my midwife. If I schrom at home, if my waters break at home, do I examine myself if there's nothing in the pelvis? And when the consultant did the scan after the failed ECV, she was like, there's a foot that's just popped down near the cervix. So in my mind, there was nothing solid in the pelvis. And she said, yep, I wouldn't tell anyone else this, but you're a midwife. So I'm happy if you just want to check there's no cord there, which is in my state of shock. I literally examined and I was like, there's nothing pulsating in my vagina, Jeremy. I'm fine. And he was sort of still in his days of sleep at that stage.
Just by the way,
yeah, we're fine.
There's nothing pulsating.
Yeah. And he was like, what? Where am I? Because he was in his deep sleep. So then I called the midwife, and it was the second on call, and she'd actually been at the ECV. And she said, what do you want to do? Because we obviously planned to labour at home as long as possible, knowing that we were going to most likely have a breech birth. But part of me was quite hesitant because I thought that there was nothing in the pelvis after what the consultant had said. So I just needed that reassurance that there was definitely a bum down and not a hand or something like that. So I said, look, what are our options to come in and just get a scan and then go home? Like, I don't want monitoring. I don't want to stay. I want to labour at home. And she spoke to the birth suite team leader, who said, there's only one person in labour, more than happy for you to come in. We understand you don't want any intervention. Happy for you to have a quick scan, go home. Like, you tell us what you want, pretty much, which I was really happy with. So I said, yep, let's go in. So I think we would have gotten to hospital by about midnight. And I hadn't been contracting or anything, but by the time we got to hospital, I was probably doing 3 and 10, just tightenings. I was very comfortable though. And we'd also not really packed a birth bag because in my mind, I was having a 42-week. So I hadn't charged my TENS machine. I didn't really have any snacks prepared. I just kind of grabbed whatever was around and threw them in a bag to go, thinking, oh, we'll come home in 2 hours anyway. Classic. So then we got to hospital and everyone was really relaxed and chill, sort of waited probably half an hour before anyone really wanted to do anything, which was kind of nice, just to chill out a little bit. And I was still really comfortable, not really doing too much. And then the reg came in, did a scan and said, yep, your baby's bum is firmly in the pelvis. Happy to go ahead. And her first question to me was, how badly do you want a vaginal birth? And I straight away was like, I will do anything in the realm of safety to have a vaginal birth. I don't want a Caesar if I can avoid it. Which shocked me to be asked that as soon as I got there, basically. But the core midwife in the birth suite was really lovely. They kind of just let us chill on our own, which was really nice. And they did offer to do a CTG, and I sort of hesitated, but I knew that I probably hadn't felt much movement for a few hours, more because I think I was running on adrenaline than anything else. So I said, yeah, let's pop the trace on, which turned out to be fine. A couple little variable decels at times, but otherwise unconcerning. And they were very much like, we should leave the CTG on for the whole time. And I was, initially like, I don't want it on. I don't want monitoring. I don't want to go looking for things, because for the few weeks prior to going into labour, I'd really struggled mentally with the thought of having a booked Caesar. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me, it wasn't what I wanted. I was even more okay with the idea of labouring and then needing the Caesar. I wanted to experience labour, and after working in the field, it just wasn't what I wanted. So I struggled a lot with that leading up to it. We just decided to go with monitoring, but my husband was really, really, questioning of the doctor, like, why are you monitoring if there's nothing wrong?
Yep.
And she said, oh, well, it's an indication because of breech. And he'd said, well, if the baby was cephalic, head down, would you be monitoring? And she said, well, no. And he said, yeah, so it's just because you're uncomfortable with the baby being bummed down.
I like him. He's great.
I was so proud of him. And I think after 9 years of being with a midwife and hearing all the stories, and we've done so much work with our midwife during pregnancy, he was just so protective and a real advocate. So I was so proud in that moment, but I was also a bit like, whatever, keep it on for another 20 minutes. If it's reassuring, take it off. And we did end up having it most of the labour. And then, we just kind of kept labouring. Our home birth midwife wasn't there at this stage. It wasn't until, I think it was between 3 and 4, I was starting to, hot up a little bit. I think I was
just before you jump into that, because your intention was to go and get an ultrasound and then come home. So what happened with that change? Like, what changed your mind?
Well, I think because I'd started to labour, the ultrasound happened and then the CTG went on. And because there was a few variable decels, they sort of just kept saying, just leave it another 10 minutes, another 10 minutes, and they would just leave us undisturbed, and I kind of slept through it. And then by the time we thought about going home, I would say probably contracting and in active labour by then.
Yeah, okay.
So, I think unconsciously we'd made the decision that, okay, we're here now. We're going to probably have the baby soon. So I kept labouring, and then I'd said to the core midwife, like, hey, I'm getting a bit uncomfortable. I'd love to use the birth pool at some stage. What are our options? I'd sort of been in and out of the shower comfortable, but just more of a distraction. And she'd said, oh, it'd be nice to do an examination if you want to get in the pool. Part of me was like, I didn't want any VEs or anything. But then the other part was like, whatever, let's do it, because the reg had sort of said, we'd like to know what's happening, and she floated the idea of a Caesar a couple of times, which again, I was so against, and it was probably a bit of a mental block for me during labour at this point as well. So I said, let's just do the VE, but if I'm a centimetre, don't tell me. So the midwife did it, and she's like, you're 3 to 4, really stretchy cervix. And this was like 2-3 hours after my waters had broken, and I was still pretty comfortable.
Great for a first time.
Yeah, I was shocked. And then so she's like, just jump in the shower. We'll just, reassess later. And I said, great, maybe we'll call our midwife in an hour because I'm pretty good at the moment. And then she came back about half an hour later. It was probably about 3:45. And she'd said, hey, I didn't want to say anything, but I think I felt something else on the examination. Do you mind if the reg does it? I was like, yep, whatever, let's do it. And the reg is like, yep, you're 5 centimetres, but there's a foot presenting. There's a foot and then the bum. And then she sort of went down the path of, this might mean you won't dilate because you don't have a presenting part against the cervix. And I was like, you don't need to tell me. I know how this works. Don't try and scare me. I want to see what happens. We want to keep going.
It's an Interesting statement. I'd like to know where the research is to support that.
Yeah, she was just like, oh, you might not dilate. And I was like, don't tell me this. I don't need it.
I don't believe there's any evidence to actually support that statement. So I just want to make that clear for people.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I was a bit out of it and not really sure. And I was just like, I don't want to hear the negativity right now. And she'd gone and spoken to the consultant on overnight, who turns out was really breech positive and sort of said, like, just let her labour, leave her alone. And she said, look, we'd like to reassess in 2 hours, which would have been about 6 o'clock. And I said, sure. Can you call my midwife in? So I'd gotten up, I'd been sort of between bed, TENS machine, shower, and I was just getting a lot of pelvic pain, which I didn't expect. I have like chronic back issues, so I thought I was going to have back pain, but this intense pelvic pain just sort of really started to intensify, I suppose. And Jeremy had been really great distracting me. Like, I'd sort of floated the idea of, I want to get in the pool. In my mind, I was going to be at 5 centimeters for hours. I was going to be in this early labor for a day. I don't know if I can get through this without something, even though I'd always planned to not have any pain relief. And he just kept saying, no, you're doing so well. Let's distract. Let's change position. Let's do something different. And then our midwife walked in the door, probably about 4:35. And I just said, oh my God, I'm so glad to see you. Can I have morphine? Which she was like, oh, I mean, let's have a chat about it. But she was super happy to give it. And I just said, I'm exhausted. I haven't slept. I just want to sleep for an hour. And she said, yep, you were 5 centimeters. You're not going to have a baby in 2 hours. Let's give morphine. Well, she didn't say you're not going to have a baby in 2 hours, but she said, you're a primate. We're happy to give you morphine. And the morphine worked amazingly. There was a fold-out double bed in the birth suite, as well as the sort of birth bed. And so Jeremy and I sort of lay down on that and snuggled and fell asleep for probably, it felt like 2 hours to me, but it was probably only an hour or 45 minutes. And meanwhile, I still had the CTG on. So our midwife very much left us disturbed birth, and we'd spoken about that. I sort of just wanted it to be space for Jeremy and I. And she was incredible and just popped in, always just showed up at the right time and just the perfect support that we needed. So then I think it was about 6 o'clock. She said, hey, Jess, is it okay if the reg re-examines you? And I was sort of half asleep and I said, whatever, let's do it. And I was 5 centimeters again. But I kind of didn't register to me. I was contracting like a freight train by then, but I was quite comfortable after the morphine, and I probably had another nap for half an hour. And our midwife said, okay, let's get up and start moving. And I got up and just had the most intense pressure in my pelvis. And then I started to get back pain, and I said, oh my God, can I try sterile water injections? Which I'd always wanted to try as a midwife because of my back issues. I thought, let's give it a go. Why not? This is the time to try. So her and another midwife came and gave them to me, and they'd set up like this floor bed with a mattress and the ball and everything on the floor, because I was sort of changing positions all the time. And as they injected it, I started screaming, and I pretty much swore and said, why the F do we tell women this hurts like a beast? This is the worst pain ever. And everyone kind of laughed, and Jeremy said it was the only time he thought I was actually in pain the whole time, because I was like, ah.
Yeah.
So, and in hindsight, I was probably transitioning at this stage. It was a fun time. And then, I just jumped in the shower, and a midwife had set up the shower with candles and essential oils, and we had music going. It was beautiful, actually, just to be in the dark. I started squatting with each contraction, and it started to get really intense. And I'd sort of in my mind said, feel like I'm involuntarily pushing on a 5 centimeter cervix, and I was trying to hold myself back almost, because I was scared, not scared of delivering, but scared that I was pushing and I was going to make things worse. And it turns out our midwife had already had a look with a mirror as I was squatting during a contraction. And she'd said to me, just go with it. You're doing an incredible job. You've got this. And then I just sort of let my body take over. And unbeknownst to me, she'd set everything up in the room already. We were all ready to go. I just, it was still dark everywhere, so I didn't really realize what was happening. And I remember really starting to struggle, and she said, try the gas. And I said, no, I don't want the gas. Like, it's not going to work. And I had it for a couple of minutes, and I just didn't really, I didn't think it did anything. I sort of just got rid of that. It was more to regulate my breathing, I think, and just relax. And then I remember looking at Jeremy like, I need to know what's happening. And so I put my fingers in my vagina and then yelled at the midwife, hey, there's a bum in my vagina. what are we doing here? And she was like, righto, let's come out, let's hop on the bed. And I got on the bed and a foot popped out straight away.
On your back, on your knees? What
On my
position were
hands
you
and
in?
knees. Yeah, I was very much like, I'm not getting on my back. I'd like to go hands and knees. That was where I wanted to be in case I sort of needed to flip quickly or anything. And yeah, she'd pulled everyone in. And I think she'd been quite gatekeepery at the door, like not letting anyone in.
Yeah.
She was extremely protective of our space. I felt the change like during the night when the reg or someone else had come in. I really felt the energy change. Whereas when our midwife was there, it was just beautiful and calm, like I could do it. And I had no issues. I suppose that's where the rapport comes into it.
But also, she would have had trust in you and protected that space with that trust as well. Whereas someone who doesn't know and may not be very comfortable with breech, they're bringing their own beliefs and thoughts into that with their energy.
Yeah.
And something that I teach in my workshop is the primary care provider needs to set the mood for everyone else and they will kind of follow suit. So if she was there, then to hold that space and hopefully they will feel that calmness from her rather than the primary person being fearful.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes such a difference. And it turns out she hadn't actually had a vaginal breech yet, but everyone else in her team were very experienced. So she was super like, let's do it. I can't wait. And very comfortable with it. And we were also lucky that the consultants on were really breech positive, which I think also made a difference. I think the stars sort of aligned, and because we knew what we wanted, it really helped. So yeah, we jumped up on the bed
So
and
a
then
foot popped out?
yeah, foot popped out. And then I just remember looking around and the consultant walked in the room. And he sort of came up to me and said, "Hey, Jess, my name's blah. Are you ready to meet your baby?" And he was just so calm. And I think him and our midwife really just set the tone because it was still dark with some fairy lights on. Yeah, they had the little spotlight on, the foot, but otherwise it was calm. And there was probably 8 people in the room with the peds team and the reg and all that, which we knew was going to happen. But it was just nice that in the moment, I had no idea that there was that amount of people. I felt like it was still our space, which was really important to us. And then basically one foot popped out and then the second foot popped out. And then I just started pushing with the contractions. And I think it was about 10 minutes between getting on the bed and delivery. So I think I pushed for like 3 minutes or something. And I didn't realize this. I've seen breech births as a midwife, but not for probably 10 years. And I didn't realize that once the bum was delivered, they wanted me just to push all the way through rather than stop, when it's cephalic, like wait for every contraction. Yeah, so in my mind, I hadn't really prepared for that. And I sort of kept saying, what do I do? And they're like, just keep pushing. And I was like, oh, that's right. I'm pushing a baby out because I was so comfortable and everyone was happy and it was kind of funny. And yeah, and then, we birthed him. So it turns out he was born about 2.5 hours after the morphine. So I had 4 hours of active labour, so flat coming out. And we knew that he'd probably be a bit flatter being breech. But yeah, he needed a little bit of help, but was back on me within 10 minutes, which was good.
Great.
But yeah, it was lovely, like to be able to look down between my legs and see him hanging down and, oh, balls, we're having a boy. Like it was just really special. And yeah, it was a really lovely moment.
Yeah. And the process of the birth as baby came through, no maneuvers or anything were needed. He just came through.
Yeah, it was completely hands off, which again, during the night when the reg asked us about a vaginal birth, I said, I want hands off the breech as much as possible. And she said, yep, that's what we do unless I need to intervene, which I was really happy with. But yeah, no, nothing. They just caught him when he came out and it was great.
Yeah, awesome. And so, what sort of resuscitation he needed? Was it just stimulation? Did he need breaths?
He had stimulation on me. So they actually probably gave a minute and a half. And we do have a video, so we could see everything that was like from me getting on the bed. We have a video until he's back on my chest, which was awesome. So yeah, I stimulated for a while, me and the midwife, probably a minute and a half. And you can hear the consultant in the background. Don't stress, guys. It's only been 30 seconds. Let's give the full minute, which is really nice to hear because, again, you don't have to get that calmness in that sort of a situation in birth. So I was really appreciative because I wasn't stressed. And then, they cut and clamped and he had a little bit of IPPV, but
So for those listening, that's just some breaths, giving baby some breaths.
Yep. Yeah. Sorry. Just a couple little breaths with a little mask and the oxygen went up to 40%. So not too much. And it was only titrated up for about a minute. And then it just went back to room air, so normal what we breathe. And then he was pretty fine. It was just his tone mostly, I suppose, from the morphine. He just took a bit to, really come round. But I think he was only on the resuscitator for about 8 minutes, and they were all really good. And they'd actually forgotten that I had morphine. So the TL said to me after a few minutes, "Did you have morphine?" I said, "Yeah, like 2.5 hours ago." She's like, "Oh," and the peds team all
That
went,
makes sense.
"Oh, that makes sense." And then half the team left because they're like, "Oh, this is fine. It's, just because of morphine, he'll come round," which was quite funny. So yeah, that was really fine. And for me, I wasn't concerned because I could see the monitors. And again, I think after working in ICU, I knew what I was looking at and what I could hear. Whereas for Jeremy, they weren't really communicating with us what was going on. And I don't know if it's just because they forgot or whether I'm not sure. But Jeremy sort of looked at me and said, "Are you concerned?" And I said, "No, he's fine. I can see everything. I'm not worried," which helped him, I think.
Yeah. And what did the immediate postpartum? So he came back to you. Did we get to breastfeed? Like, did you have that space to reconnect after that?
Yeah, it was great actually. Our primary midwife was there for an hour and then she had to go to another birth. So we had her backup, who was amazing as well. Yeah, he went on the breast quite quickly and I really wanted to breastfeed and he went on with no issues. He was a real little goer. And he was quite little. He was only 2.5 kilos, which more than we expected. I was, a little bit nervous about the feeding with him being so small, but he just went on and we had probably 4 hours in birth suite. It was really lovely, really relaxed. Probably took an hour and a half for my placenta to come out. And I was a little bit worried with the extra lobe and the cord insertion of having a retained placenta. Our midwife and I, we sort of just said, okay, let's just have Synto or, I think they use carbetocin to help the placenta come out because I didn't want to go to theatre with a retained placenta after having a breech birth.
So you were aiming for physiological?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And had you got upright position? Yeah.
Yeah. Tried everything.
Yeah.
Tried him on the breast, tried the birth stool, tried walking around, and it just didn't work. So then we said, okay, let's have it. And then it was probably still another 15 minutes after that it came out, and I had minimal blood loss with an intact peri. So I was really, really lucky there.
Yeah, great. And how long did you say you went home after that?
Well, we ended up staying in hospital for the night. So, of course, we'd planned not to be in hospital. We wanted to discharge from birth suite, but because his APGARs, I think it was 5 and 7 or 5 and 8, they said it was a notifiable APGAR, and then they did a gas, and one of the numbers, his pH was slightly off, but not enough to be concerning. And also he was little. So the home birth girls said, "Look, we recommend you stay." So I sort of trusted them, and they previously said we're only going to recommend it strongly if that's what we think, because I knew that, they would probably be honest if they thought we were fine to go home. So we ended up staying. And then I think one of the new policies at that hospital is if they've got an APGAR of 5 or something like that, they recommend blood sugars on the baby, which I thought, I was like, no, we're not going to do blood sugars. That's unnecessary. And also for his size, I declined it because I knew I'd been leaking colostrum from 22 weeks and I didn't want to have blood sugars and then look for further things. And I said I was comfortable with the signs of a hypoglycemic baby. So we stayed overnight. Yeah, we went up to the ward, which really lucky. They're all single rooms in our local hospital. But the midwives are really busy on the ward, understaffed. And again, I completely understand that. But they'd sort of said, we want you to stay for 4th hourly monitoring on baby, which didn't happen. Like, I think maybe they knew I was a midwife and sort of left us alone a little bit. And it was like cold and loud and uncomfortable. And we just wanted to go home. And, we didn't get a lot of food. So just a few little things that we didn't love. And our midwives had, like the home birth midwives had organised our discharge so we could leave really early the next day, but the peds didn't, like the paediatricians hadn't been talking to each other. So the next day after,
usually waiting for
the next day after little sleep and just wanting to get home, 2 different peds came in and said, "We're really concerned if you want to take your baby home because you had a notifiable gas and XYZ of the sugars." And I sort of started questioning them, and the one that came in didn't know that I was a midwife. And I said, "Look, this was the gas, this was this. I'm comfortable." And then once I started saying a few things, she was like, "Oh, are you medical?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm an ICU nurse. Like, I'm happy to take my baby home." And she was very much like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we don't mind. You take your baby home." But I don't know, it was just a lack of communication kind of really frustrated both of us. So I just want to get out of hospital. But
Yeah.
we left eventually by about lunchtime. So we would have been on the ward for almost 24 hours. So yeah, it was great to get home.
Yeah. And did you manage to cook some sausage rolls?
Yeah, I
Did you
did.
achieve your meals?
I did. Although Jeremy jokes that I got halfway through and then laid on the couch. So he had to finish them all.
Teamwork,
So
team effort.
exactly. So yeah, I'd made all these sort of apple and fennel and pork sausage rolls and lactation
Yeah.
brownies, and yeah, they're delicious. It was great postpartum food. Um, so yeah, I was really lucky that I'd done all that. But because we'd left the house sort of late at night to go for the scan, we'd left all our dishes out and everything, and because I'd been cooking, but one of our best mates who lives close by and also works at the hospital, she'd already said she was happy to come back and feed our dog and do all that. And it turns out she'd come to our house early. She cleaned up everything. We had one of my other best mates was in town. She dropped off, bread, milk, fruit, preemie clothes because he was too little for anything we'd gotten and all the nappies. So we were really lucky that we had our village really helped out, and yeah, our parents and everyone were just amazing.
And how long did you breastfeed?
Still breastfeeding. Yeah, he's 4 months old now and still breastfeeding. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Done. If someone's listening now and they've got a breech baby on board, what would you recommend that they have a listen to, read, look at? Is there anything that you looked at yourself?
Before I knew Bub was breech, I had topped up on a lot of reading. So I read a lot of Ina May Gaskin, which has, again, it's older stories. She talks a lot about the farm and all that. And I'd read enough about breech birth in that, as well as just positive birth stories. And I'd gone on to Australian Birth Stories to try and find some positive breech birth stories, especially for a primate, like a first time. But I think there was maybe one, and the rest might have been either twins or a multi or a surprise. So I was really like, we really need more positive stories, because it had been my physio who'd said, hey, you should really start listening to positive breech stuff, to really get your mindset in it. So again, really hard to find the resources. Trying to think what else.
Now they have stories.
Yeah, thank goodness. And actually, it was my physio that recommended you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And this is what we need. Women need it. Because since having a vaginal breech, so many women are like, oh, I wish I could have had that option because I was first baby and they said I had to have a Caesar, or they scared me into it. And I understand that not everyone is going to choose to opt for a vaginal birth or attempt it, or be lucky enough that their baby's in a position for it. But I think having the resources is really important.
And just being informed, making an informed decision, not having the power taken away.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really interesting. Yeah. I think I was lucky again to be supported by the team we had. Like our home birth team absolutely made a difference. Like I said before, our midwife protected our space, and I think she, along with us advocating, but she made our birth as good as it was. Like, I don't think we would have had that experience without her. We were just so incredibly lucky. If we just had have gone in labouring into hospital without that continuity, I don't know if it would have gone the way it did.
Yeah. So any last words of wisdom that you would like to share? It doesn't have to be breech specific, but anything that you wish you had been told in pregnancy or in birth?
I think educate and empower yourself is really, really important. Having a support person, whether it's a partner or a sister or a friend or someone with you, really helps, especially when you're in the throes of labour and you're sort of like, you can be really prepared yourself, but you get to that point where you're like, I don't care what's happening. So that was really important to have that support person. And I think something that surprised me of pregnancy, and I don't think we talk about it enough, maybe as midwives, definitely not, in the public system, is that antenatal anxiety that can come up. I was quite shocked by that. I'm pretty chill, but the anxiety during pregnancy really, was really something, and that overthinking. And I think it's okay for women to feel that and have someone to talk to about that, because I think if you go into your labour holding a lot of that, like for me, looking back, I think it wasn't until I was 5 centimetres and I had that VE and the doctor said, oh, it could end in a Caesar. I actually felt my body let go and say, okay, I've laboured to here. If this is how it turns out, I'm okay with that. And I think that was actually for me the turning point of letting everything go, because I'd been quite a mess leading up to knowing how my birth was going to go. So I think, being able to talk about it and working through any fears going into birth, because they'll come up most likely in birth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. It was
No
awesome.
worries. Thanks so much for having me, Sasha. It was great. And yeah, I think it's awesome that you're spreading the positivity about breech and regardless of what option women choose, but I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you for listening to the Breech Birth podcast. These stories matter. They stretch what we think we know and bring voice to experiences that need to be heard. I'm so grateful to the women who have shared their experiences with us, raw, real, and full of wisdom. If this episode resonated with you, please follow, share, or leave a review. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Breech Birth Podcast. And if you have a breech story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, may we continue to reclaim the narrative, one story at a time.